Hi, Peace Church. So it's Maundy Thursday today. And Maundy Thursday is one of those worship services that I always look forward to because there's a sense of intimacy to it, and we can do some kind of creative things and different things, sometimes in the ways that we serve communion. Sometimes in other places I've done foot washings and things like that, and obviously we can't do those things this week. So I've been thinking all week long about what we could do and how we can take advantage maybe of this kind of unique time and some of the unique opportunities we have. And as I was racking my brain, I was kind of getting frustrated because I just couldn't come up with anything that I really felt good about. And I spied a book sitting on my desk, and it's this one right here. And it was given to me just a few weeks ago by Carrie Madela. She came in my office all excited because she had discovered this book. And she was so kind, and she actually bought me a copy as well because she loved it so much. And it's a book that I read first probably 30 years ago almost. And it made such an impact in my life. And it changed the way I understood God. It made me really think differently about the way that I understood myself. And what was kind of cool is that I had loaned this book out to someone and I'd never gotten it back. And so when she gave this to me, it was like, oh, it was an old friend that came home. And so I thought, you know what? This would be a great opportunity for us to share a little bit about this book together. So I'm going to stop holding it up here, but it is The Return of the Prodigal Son by Henry Nouwen. And I'm going to have the painting is by Rembrandt. And Nouwen was a Catholic priest, a professor, a writer, a theologian. He had an incredible career. He was one of the most respected leaders in many ways in the Christian church for many years. He taught at the theological schools at Notre Dame, at Yale, and at Harvard. And at kind of the height of his career, he surprised everyone when he left his position at Harvard and he went to go and serve and live with a number of people in a place that was dedicated to caring for people with significant mental, intellectual disabilities. And he became their chaplain. He became their pastor. And he speaks a little bit of that journey in this book, but this book is really about him encountering this painting of Rembrandt. The painting depicts the father and the prodigal son and the older brother. Those are the characters that you see kind of in the most light. And then there are some shadowy figures in the back as well, and we're not going to touch on those tonight, but if you'd like to read the book, I'll make sure there's a link and information for where you can find a copy. So if you know the story of the prodigal son, it is a story about a son who went to his father and asked for his inheritance all at once while the father was still living, which is basically saying, look, you're no good to me alive. And you're not dead yet, so give me your money. Give me the money that's coming to me once you die so I can go have my fun. It would have been a horrible thing for, in that time period, for a father to do. And the response of the father in that moment and the response of the older brother later on in the story are really what drew me to this book initially, but also to thinking about this for Maundy Thursday. Maundy is a word that comes from the Latin. It means mandatum. And mandatum is basically Latin for command. And Maundy Thursday is based on Jesus when he washed his disciples' feet. And he said that I'm giving you a new command, that you would love one another. And that the world would know that we are his disciples as we love one another. And I was thinking about this Maundy Thursday and thinking about the ways that Jesus showed his love to his disciples. And the story of the prodigal son just leapt out at me because There are so many times when the disciples just seem kind of clueless, or they get it wrong, or they betray or deny him, and Jesus just doesn't seem to ever really give up on those disciples. And that's the story of the prodigal son. The son ends up in just a horrible condition, ends up his life wasted, and thinks to himself that, his father's servants have it better than he does. And so he'll confess his sin to his father. He'll not even ask to be restored as a son, but just to be able to get a job as a hired hand. And as the story goes, the father sees the son coming across the field as he returns, and before the son has been able to say anything or do anything, the father reaches out and embraces him and welcomes home his son. And he throws this huge feast for the son, and the older brother is upset because the feast that the father throws is the cows and the cattle and the stuff that brother would have inherited once the father had died. And the older brother's kind of miffed by this. And the painting of the prodigal son Rembrandt tries to recreate a little bit of that, the father welcoming the son home, and the brother's response to that. And I'm going to just read you some quotes from Henry Nouwen's book, and invite you to just reflect on the ways that you have been maybe somewhat like the younger son, and reflect on ways that you have been perhaps at times somewhat like the older brother, and reflect on the call and the invitation that God gives us in this story to become like the Father. So Henry Nouwen writes, "For most of my life, I have struggled to find God, to know God, to love God. I have tried hard to follow the guidelines of the spiritual life, to pray, to always work for others, to read the scriptures, and to avoid the many temptations to dissipate myself. I have failed many times, but always tried again, even when I was close to despair. Now, I wonder whether I have sufficiently realized that during all this time, God has been trying to find me, to know me, and to love me. The question is not, how am I to find God? But how am I to let myself be found by him? The question is not, how am I to know God? But how am I to let myself be known by God? And finally, the question is not, how am I to love God? But how am I to let myself be loved by God? God is looking into the distance for me, trying to find me, and longing to bring me home. I am the prodigal son. Every time I search for unconditional love where it cannot be found. The farther I run away from the place where God dwells, the less I am able to hear the voice that calls me the beloved. And the less I hear that voice, the more entangled I become in the manipulations and power games of the world. Many of my daily preoccupations suggest that I belong more to the world than to God. A little criticism makes me angry, and a little rejection makes me depressed. A little praise raises my spirits, and a little success excites me. It takes very little to raise me up or thrust me down. Often, I am like a small boat on the ocean, completely at the mercy of its waves. All the time and energy I spend in keeping some kind of balance and preventing myself from being tipped over and drowning shows that my life is mostly a struggle for survival, not a holy struggle, but an anxious struggle, resulting from the mistaken idea that it is the world that defines me. Although claiming my true identity as a child of God, I still live as though the God to whom I am returning demands an explanation. I still think about his love as conditional and about home as a place I am not yet fully sure of. While walking home, I keep entertaining doubts about whether I will be truly welcome when I get there. As I look at my spiritual journey, my long and fatiguing trip home, I see how full it is of guilt about the past and worries about the future. I realize my failures and know that I have lost the dignity of my sonship, but I am not yet able to fully believe that where my failings are great, grace is always greater. Still clinging to my sense of worthlessness, I project for myself a place far below that which belongs to the Son. From God's perspective, one hidden act of repentance, one little gesture of selfless love, one moment of true forgiveness is all that is needed to bring God from his throne to run to his returning Son and to fill the heavens with sounds of divine joy. Now I realize that the real sin is to deny God's first love for me, to ignore my original goodness, because without claiming that first love and that original goodness for myself, I lose touch with my true self and embark on the destructive search among the wrong people and in the wrong places for what can only be found in the house of my Father. The younger son's return takes place in the very moment that he reclaims his sonship, even though he has lost all the dignity that belongs to it. In fact, it was the loss of everything that brought him to the bottom line of his identity. He hit the bedrock of his sonship. In retrospect, it seems that the prodigal had to lose everything to come into touch with the ground of his being. There are many elder sons and elder daughters who are lost while still at home. The parable that Rembrandt painted might well be called the parable of the lost sons. Not only did the younger son who left home to look for freedom and happiness in a distant country get lost, but the one who stayed home also became a lost man. Exteriorly, he did all the things a good son is supposed to do, but interiorly, he wandered away from his father. He did his duty. He worked hard every day and fulfilled all his obligations, but became increasingly unhappy and unfree. The world in which I have grown up in is a world so full of grades and scores and statistics that consciously or unconsciously, I always try to take my measure against all the others. Much sadness and gladness in my life flows directly from my comparing, and most, if not all of this comparing, is useless and a terrible waste of time and energy. Our God, who is both father and mother to us, does not compare, never. Even though I know in my heart that this is true, it is still very hard to fully accept it with my whole being. When I hear someone called a favorite son or daughter, my immediate response is that the other children must be less appreciated or less loved. I cannot fathom how all of God's children can be favorites. And still, they are. When I look from my place in the world into God's kingdom, I quickly come to think of God as the keeper of some great celestial scoreboard, and I will always be afraid of not making the grade. But as soon as I look from God's welcoming home into the world, I discover that God loves with a divine love, a love that cedes to all women and men their uniqueness without ever comparing. God does not love the younger son more than the elder. In the story, the father goes out to the elder son just as he did to the younger. He urges him to come in and says, "My son, you are always with me, and all I have is yours." I recognize the difference between the two hands of the Father, and a new world of meeting opened up for me. The Father is not simply a great patriarch. He is mother as well as father. He touches the Son with a masculine hand and a feminine hand. He holds and she caresses. He confirms and she consoles. He is indeed God, in whom both manhood and womanhood, fatherhood and motherhood are fully present. That gentle, caressing right hand echoes for me the word of the prophet Isaiah. Can a woman forget her baby at the breast, feel no pity for the child she has borne? Even if these were to forget, I shall not forget you. Look, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands. But what a painful difference between the two. The father bends over his returning son. The elder son stands stiffly erect, a posture accentuated by the long staff reaching from his hand to the floor. The father's mantle is wide and welcoming. The son's hangs flat over his body. The father's hands are spread out and touch the homecomer in a gesture of blessing. The sons are clasped together and held close to his chest. There is light on both faces, but the light from the father's face flows through his whole body, especially his hands, and engulfs the younger son in a great halo of luminous warmth, whereas the light on the face of the elder son is cold and constricted. One of the greatest challenges of the spiritual life is to receive God's forgiveness. The story of the prodigal son is the story of a God who goes searching for me and who doesn't rest until he has found me. I am beginning now to see how radically the character of my spiritual journey will change when I no longer think of God as hiding out and making it as difficult as possible for me to find him, but instead as the one who is looking for me while I am doing the hiding. The young man being embraced by the Father is no longer just one repentant sinner, but the whole of humanity returning to God. The broken body of the prodigal becomes the broken body of humanity, and the baby-like face of the returning child becomes the face of all suffering people longing to re-enter the lost paradise. Thus, Rembrandt's painting becomes more than the mere portrayal of a moving parable. It becomes the summary of the history of our salvation. The light surrounding both father and son now speaks of the glory that awaits the children of God. These have been just a few excerpts from this book, and I hope that some of these quotes have had some impact on you, some resonance in your soul. Jesus calls us on Maundy Thursday to love one another as he has loved us. He showed his disciples the full extent of his love, not just by washing their feet, or even by breaking bread, or even by dying on a cross and rising again. He showed the full extent of his love through all these things and so much more, many of which involved everyday ordinary life lived together, involved forgiveness and mercy, involved tenderness and love, involved tough conversations and difficult challenges. But all of them were done with the Father's hands, through the Son, in the Spirit. Angie Wright has been blessing us on Facebook with some beautiful hymns and songs played on the piano, and I asked her if she would help close us out tonight with the hymn Have Thine Own Way. So please spend some time reflecting as we close.